Thank you so much for coming to SGV's UX's 13th meetup. This is our first webinar though. We're usually a monthly meetup. Normally we meet in person somewhere in the SGV area. Sometimes we go as far out as the 909, which is like Diamond Bar, Rancho Cucamonga. And let's see, I am Jesse. I am a longstanding volunteer for SGVUX. Grace is the organizer. Say hi, Grace. She's also one of the founders. Let's see, Jennifer Dew is also a long-time standing volunteer. She's going to be moderating the session for us. Hi, Jen.
Hi.
And let's see. I want to thank our sponsor for this evening. Our sponsor is actually one of our speakers, Raphael. Thank you so much for making this event free for everyone to attend. We really appreciate it. Round of applause for Raphael. And let's see, so as a webinar, our format is going to go kind of like this. We're going to have an AMA with our three speakers, Zohair, Amélie, and Raphael. And we would ask that you keep yourselves on mute just because this is Zoom, and to put your questions in the chat box there. Do we all know where the chat box is on Zoom? Yes. Nice. Awesome. So let's get started. Jen.
Hi everyone. So we're gonna do like about an hour. So this event is an hour and a half. We'll do an hour of questions for the PMs, and then at around 8 o'clock we're gonna do a breakout session. So each PM will have a room, and then you'll be in one of the rooms, so you can get like a smaller group to talk to them for about 30 minutes before we wrap up. So I'm going to ask the PMs to introduce themselves. Just touch upon how you came into the role of a PM. So we'll start with Zoe, and then we'll go to Amélie, and then Raphael.
Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to you guys. I'm happy to relay my experiences. I just hope somebody out there finds something I say beneficial. So I'm excited to be here and help answer any questions you guys have. But a little bit about me, I guess, kind of high level. I'm originally from the Bay Area. I worked at the tech scene up there. I started in what was pretty much a support role out of Google, and kind of worked towards becoming an analyst there. And that really exposed me to a lot of different parts of the business. And I really started work on product analytics, which is kind of what opened that door to product for me. So from there, became a product manager, started on data products as that was kind of my background, but shifted towards operational products, and then later growth products, where I've been at startups in numerous places, and most recently down here at Patient Pop, where I've led one of the growth teams to expand our customer base. So that's me.
Thank you.
Cool. I'll go second. So I'm Amélie Beurrier. I'm a product manager and designer. So I currently work at Amélie Studio. We're an agency based in Venice. We work with early stage startups, and we range all the way up to the Walmart and Better Hathaway of the world. So a very diverse client base, which is cool. So I've had multiple experiences. I think that's a common thread in product is most people don't come from product. There is not a real school. So for me, I came from more of a business background, and I started working in startups. And one day, one of the designer quits, and the CEO looks around the room and is like, who can design? And I was one of the first employees, and I raised my hand. And so I got into product design first. And from there, got interested in more of the why are we building those features, and like why are we building them this way, and kind of graduated from that to product management. So I've been working at startups, which is also a common thread in product managers, but also at bigger companies. So I've been working at a bunch of different companies basically. Recently I was at Amazon working on data science products, but I've worked in like consumer products, SaaS, a bunch of like different like mobile apps, and also like pure data products that are like more, don't really have an interface. So yeah, it's been a wild ride, and I'm really happy to be able to share with anyone that either looks at getting into product design or UX or product management. Like that's really, those three functions are very similar to each other and very close to each other. So happy to answer any questions around that.
Thank you, Amélie. Raphael?
So hi, I'm Raphael, and really like very happy to be here and to chat with all of you. My background is sort of like a pinball machine where I've like done different roles in design and UX and like research, and then sort of, again, like pinballed my way to a product management role. So I currently work at a company called AEG Presents. We do live entertainment, such as like Coachella is one of our big festivals. And I basically work behind the scenes building a lot of automated software or software automation that helps all of our marketing team do the marketing that they need to do for the 12,000 shows we do a year. And a lot of the tools are also used for a lot of data analysis and sort of customer analysis. And then I work in some areas of our like kind of ticketing and payments app for our festivals. Before this, I've worked at a few different startups as a UX researcher and designer. My last company, actually, I was there for 2 weeks before the company ran out of money, which was a lot of fun. And fun fact, I've been out of a job twice in the same month back in 2018. So it's pretty good. That is the short story there, is that in case you are out of a job at this moment because of what's happening in the world, don't worry, things will pick up again and it'll be okay. That's my main thing. Besides that, I've worked in research. I worked at AT&T working on their DirecTV streaming platform. And then I kind of have a variety of other consulting background. And then I got into documentary filmmaking a long time ago. So that's my background. Very weird.
Cool. Thanks for all the intros. So next question for you three. How do you define your role and what you do to someone who doesn't work in tech?
I'll just jump in, like, because we're in LA, around LA, like, I usually take an analogy with the entertainment space. So I usually tell people that I'm a producer. Basically, it's like Murphy's Law, like anything that can happen, like happens, and you kind of have to deal with all the different moving parts. So you're like interfacing with many different people in order to produce like an end result. And when your result is amazing and gets an award, you're not likely to be the person on stage, but you get like the satisfaction of doing something great. If something doesn't work, it's usually your job to kind of pick it up. So it's very similar to a production job, if any of you guys are or were in that space. Like, I think that's like the closest thing that I can think to like illustrate it.
I think like Amélie, I also use analogies. I'd say the most common way I've described it to be is like the coach on a basketball team. You're not necessarily one of the players, but you gotta have the guy who passes really well. You have Kobe who shoots, and you have like all your different pieces. You need to make sure all those pieces are in sync, and then you end up winning the game. Like, you have to make sure every moving part, most of the time it's, around design and development, but also every other part of an organization, of a user experience, of what that customer or user wants at the end of the day is accomplished. And if it's not, then you have to rethink the strategy you put forth.
I think those are two very great answers. I would definitely take it back off that. Definitely producer, definitely there's a coach aspect. I always like to think about parts of the job as being a therapist, because a lot of the time you are trying to get people to just align on the same like idea or like same momentum going forward. And sometimes our job, I've read in books that were called like mini CEOs. It's probably further from the truth, although sometimes it is fun to imagine ourselves like that. But oftentimes I feel like definitely a therapist, especially on my team and in my company. But yeah, the main thing is like, how do we help the business unlock value out of the things that we're building, and how do we help people unlock the value out of the processes that we build and work nicely together.
Okay, so we're gonna try to break that break that up into something more concrete. So can you share a project that you work on that you are most proud of, and like specify like what the challenges were and why you think that project, why you're so proud of it? Like what about it made it so memorable and so hard? And did you encompass any of those qualities of a producer, coach, or therapist?
I'll say, so one project I think that I've worked on most recently was around ticketing and payments. We were basically working with like 3 different sets of teams and trying to align the work that they're doing, and especially align their roadmaps together. So we actually designed a 3-day workshop where we had to go out of town and speak with the team. And it's a team I've actually never had any work with. So in that role, I'll say I definitely played the therapist role, because a lot of the time, I think communication is probably the biggest hindrance. I will say one of my favorite things, like a course that I've taken or a workshop that I've taken over the past few years that I would definitely recommend to everybody is improv. Because in improv, you have to sit down and you have to listen to the other person, and you have to play in their reality and play with their language. And a lot of times what you do as a researcher, as a designer, you are playing with the language of your users. So for this particular workshop that we did, these 3 days of workshop with this team, I tried to stop everyone every so often and pause and just make sure that they were listening to each other and that they were on the same page. That was like literally 80% of my job on those 3 days. And I think most of the time my job is about that. It's really just getting people to speak the same language. So I'd say that that project that I worked on had those elements of being a therapist. Definitely the producer, there's like little, everyone will need something like documentation sometimes. They'll need requirements written. You're like what do you call those little like keys with a bunch of the different little tools on them, kind of like that.
Cool. For me, I think the coolest feature, the coolest product that I worked on within Patient Pop was actually kind of an odd one, because it wasn't really customer facing inherently. So a big challenge we have is that we have a ginormous customer support team over at Patient Pop, because like we have a very hands-on service that we provide to small medical practices. A lot of them aren't very tech savvy, quite frankly. So we ended up having this, like literally half the company of the 700-person company or so worked in support. So one thing we started investing in was actually providing insights as to customer success for that support team to interact with that customer base. So kind of surfacing things like, all right, how successful was this product? What are they getting out of it? And that kind of allowed the opportunity for certain teams to kind of, upsell specific features or really communicate to those customers specifically. And we actually ended up seeing a huge increase in overall adoption of specific tools as a result. And it was one of those things where I think it's important to understand the ecosystem you're in and the company that you're in. Because I think sometimes as, a product manager, you want to think of like the coolest, most interesting solution. And an internal dashboard isn't necessarily like the sexy thing to do. But it ended up having this humongous impact that taught us a lot about our customers that we ended up taking into basically the customer facing side of this. Being a SaaS B2B product, we had like, an external portal or external dashboards, and we started surfacing a lot of the data that we saw customers getting most excited about and use information from that customer support team to build that in. So I think it ended up having like way bigger impact than we thought, and actually ended up guiding a lot of our roadmap for maybe a good 6 to 9 months. And then alternatively, I think it was also just a good lesson in that, sometimes the most impactful products aren't necessarily the most interesting, but it could go a long way for the end user or the customer to be successful.
So for me, so I work at an agency right now, so I don't have one unique product. I work with different clients on different products, and I kind of like jump in and out of projects. One thing that we've done this year that I'm really proud of, so we're working, so Chance the Rapper purchased the Chicagoist, which is a media in Chicago. And so we've been working with him and his team to relaunch that. Like can't give like enormous like amounts of details, but basically he came to see us wanting to work on this like new product that basically would be like more of a like media product. And so it was more of a creative process in the sense that there were a lot of different ideas kind of thrown around the table, and there was a lot of feature ideas and not a lot of stuff because it was pre-launch. Like we didn't have a lot of insights on the users. It's not like we were coming with this existing product and we had a ton of analytics. We were actually like completely, like it was like a virgin product. So it had no users and we're relaunching something completely new. So we went out to Chicago and interviewed like, I would say like close to probably 60 people. So we organized that for a few weeks, and then we went out there with my team and we had everybody involved from the CEO to the engineers, the designers in the different user interviews. And that was really great because we came out of that with very clear yes and no's insights on what we wanted to build. We had built something and we also had prototypes. So we ended up like being able to ask like general questions to users and then showing them something and actually getting their feedback on it. So that was really great. And the fact that the entire team was involved gave a lot of motivation for everybody to think about the user every day for the rest of the project. So I think that was a really cool kind of back to the basics thing to do. So yeah, I guess I'm proud of that.
Cool. So it sounds like there's a lot of moving parts and all the teams that you've worked on and company structure is different. So can you talk about like how is the team structure at your current job in terms of like developers, designers, and other teams that you work with? And then what are the processes like, and also if you have like a preference of like how like you work with designers on research, or how do you work with developers and like iterate?
Basically for my current teams, so we're an agency, we have a few designers, a few developers, and we create teams for each client. In one team, you're going to have usually a product manager and a designer, and sometimes it's the same person for smaller projects, and then developers or data scientists, or both. And the way we work for design, like when you have more than one designer, for example, you usually have someone who's going to be more like product oriented, that's going to be like interacting with the developers very closely and with the client very closely. And then you're going to have a specialized designer that comes in more for UI or UX specifically. The way we work as a team, and it's really why I love my current team, by opposition, not that I didn't like my other teams, but I think it functions really well, is that it's a highly collaborative environment where it's not like the designer comes up with like the UX designer comes up with an insight and then passes it to the UI designer who comes up with an interface and then passes it to the developers and that implements. It's really not like that. It's more like the product manager is in charge of making everybody aligned around the problem. And then we're all free to participate into finding solutions. And sometimes like the best design solution is going to come from an engineer. And sometimes a designer is going to be like, well, maybe on the technical standpoint, like we could try to like take this other route. Like would that work? Because it works for the user experience. So really like having those different voices like working together is super important. And it's been like involving engineers in the user research to a certain extent, like, because you obviously want to be sensitive with their time. But it's been really helpful because everybody is, good ideas come from anywhere in the room. So you want to really empower that in your team. So yeah, that's the way we work.
I think for me, like, I mean, when it comes to processes that I currently engage in compared to like other companies. So I mean, I've been a PM at companies like Twitter. I've been at like the 20-person startup. Now I'm kind of at a mid-sized company, and I'd say all those companies are kind of a different end-to-end process. But what I really try to focus on was the idea of collaboration. And I think Amélie like hit that, spot on, where like the best idea could really come from anywhere. And sometimes you're the expert on the product, but may not be an expert on a specific problem. And so being able to create an environment where you're able to have that sort of collaboration between not just design and development, but also other key stakeholders that might have some degree of knowing, kind of really helps you shape what a product roadmap should be and the processes that you need to set in place for that. I mean, like oftentimes we would start, a quarter or even kind of going into certain projects, or oftentimes really a problem to solve, which might be like, all right, if we want to increase retention by X%, what are the best ways we do it? And we kind of go into like a mini design sprint. And, we try to condense, say a few days worth of brainstorming, prototyping, maybe even like hacking out something very lightweight to see what it could look like. And that usually leans a lot on like the designers, but also a lot of whiteboarding. And depending on your team and your makeup, there could be a right or wrong way to do it. But in my last couple of roles, I went a long way of not just kind of bringing that environment, but also bringing ideas to the table. Prior to Patient Pop, I worked at a 20-person company. So we were able to do design sprints literally for the entire company. I kind of get everybody in the room or break up in a couple different groups, start just whiteboarding different ideas and solutions. And then not only do you piece together, say like what the product could look like, you also start opening up the questions amongst a lot of other teams as to what do they have to do to support that product feature, or what might be expected of customers to engage with, et cetera. And it really kind of helps cemented aspects of the vision that we're trying to put forth. So I'd say that's my favorite process to at least try to implement the best I can.
On my team, we have 6 developers overseas, 2 developers in-house, and then we've got 3 DevOps. We have 3 data scientists, and then we've got a couple of like system architects that are in-house. Between all those people, we work on a different range of products at our company. And I think just similar to like what Zohair said and what Amélie said, in terms of just like giving our team the context of the problem and the context of where users are coming from, we try to then brainstorm solutions. I'll say like one of my main focuses is, with my boss and my boss's bosses, like what are the problems that they are trying to solve? What are the things that they're most worried about? What are their anxieties? And I try to like have things ready to solve those issues. And a lot of times, there's multiple solutions that could be like, thought of, and we need to kind of prioritize like based on whatever amount of time we have right now, or like our resources in terms of funding, whatever it is, we have to come up with the kind of analysis of those different solutions. So I try to encourage our team to come up with those solutions and come up with recommendations before they even like come to us. But oftentimes it's just like great. We sit down and we'll kind of brainstorm 3 different ideas, and we'll kind of throw spaghetti against the wall and go through all like the risks that could be coming up with one solution or another. That's sort of how we worked, I think, the best so far.
So PMs are in charge of managing the roadmap and the vision of the product. What are some strategies to help align the vision with other teams, and how do you share and present the roadmap with the company and stakeholders?
I'll say from my end, because a lot of the products that I'm building right now are kind of internally facing, what I try to do is just sort of look at like what is the impact of the problems that we're currently seeing right now, and in terms of our solutions, what are the impacts of what they could deliver, and we try to balance like other teams have priorities that are really important. A lot of times there's a lot of political weight behind some of the priorities, and some are going to be more important than others. Those are some considerations that are like just real world, and we have to take those into account. And so in terms of our roadmap, whenever we're actually like presenting it, we want to make sure that like the most important people in the room are happy, which is sometimes a trade-off with like what is actually good for everyone. It's just a reality. Like I know in my company, I don't know about you, Zohair, or you, Amélie, if you have to deal with that kind of thing, but yeah, that's some of the stuff that I have to deal with?
Yeah, I think for presenting the roadmap, like it depends on which kind of organizations you're in. So for a very like small, like early stage startup, you're gonna want to have very agile tools. Like you don't necessarily need like a presentation of your roadmap and like a 2-year roadmap. That doesn't necessarily make sense for a product that is like pre-launch or that's not necessarily like has like a team of like 100 people. So I think for that, it's better to keep it simple and just have like a really organized like board of your work, for example, with like clear milestones, and just make sure that you align with your coworker like every week or two, with like priorities are very clear. If you get into bigger organizations, like that's where that gets way more challenging, and you want to like make sure that the prioritization is not like you're not like kind of stepping on other people's toes when you're prioritizing your work, and you also want to make sure that you don't get deprioritized when the stuff you're doing is really important. I think like I don't know, like I've been at different organizations that were definitely like using their different like structures for that. I don't know that I found something that's kind of a cure-all. Like I always feel like using metrics is really helpful, and kind of bringing everybody back to the user always is really helpful. Like I've seen a ton of like very worthy like documents and long meetings with a ton of people, and I don't know that that's really what makes people like aligned. Something I like to use is verbatim from customer service. Like you just go to customer service people and you ask them like, what's the thing that the most like annoying right now? And usually you have metrics to back it up, and that you can prioritize much easier because you're going to be able to like give like customer quotes that are really frustrated, or customer quotes that are like really excited by something. And that's usually something like, let's say you prioritize this feature 3 months later, you can come back with this like great achievement and be like, okay, we did this, what's next? And just like tackle them one after the other. Also like just having metrics on like how good the business is doing. Like I think as PMs, like it's important not to fall into being like too specialized in like the design aspect of things or the technology aspect of things. Like I think it's really important to stay generalist and really like have a good understanding of the business like numbers, and make it like very clear and very like simple to understand for everybody across the organization. Kind of like number of users and how much money are we making, and like how much runway do we have? Like those are information that is I think important to share. Like I believe in very transparent organizations. When you don't have that ability, when your organization is not behaving this way, always trying to find like those like nuggets of information that you can share across the board. I've seen engineers, for example, react really, really well when you share product metrics and user metrics with them, and they get like a lot more involved, and they get a lot more like, they feel more like just involved and close to the user. Like I think that's kind of like how I'm dealing with it. But there is no cure-all. Like it kind of depends on every organization.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that like it really depends on the organization you're in, the culture you're in, etc. I think for me, the best methods that I've found to align vision has really come with metrics and focusing on the problem you want to solve versus going through features in detail until you really need to, especially like say before you're like working on delivering a product. And oftentimes I would start like with the highest level possible, like start with the financial aspect and be like, all right, we're going to focus on acquiring new users because we're going to get X, when we're going to increase by X if we, acquire Y number of people versus say like a churn type question where we're worried about losing customers. And really kind of lay out that foundation there. And then kind of from there, kind of build down what the biggest challenges of being able to accomplish that goal are. And I feel like when you kind of set the stage as for the why you're doing something, whether it's, other stakeholders, whether it's the CEO, whoever it might be, it really helps guide that conversation. Otherwise, oftentimes I'd go into a room and start talking about, the product we're building without addressing the why. And then you start getting questions that are kind of, you can say political in nature, but also just because teams are worried about what they're working on, they'll say, well, it's great that you're doing that, but how about this? Or, you start having a lot more back and forth that kind of steers away from the conversation you're trying to have. Whereas when you really try to, at least in my experience going in, when I try to focus that conversation and really focus on the why we're doing something, it ends up turning into a conversation of, all right, I see what product is doing. Maybe like we can kind of jump on that, or maybe we can collaborate in other ways if, in terms of customer support or marketing or whatever else it might be. So that's been successful for me, both, I would say, presenting the roadmap broadly to a big audience, as well as just kind of small stakeholder groups trying to get buy-in.
Okay, next question is about technical expertise. How important is it for a PM to understand that? What specific skills and knowledge have you found to be most helpful? And talk more about like how you learned it.
So, I can start with that. I'm not technical at all from an engineering perspective. And in my experience, so I would say this, the more technical or the more you know about how a product is built, the better off you are. And if you want to invest time into developing that skill set, it will absolutely benefit you as a product manager. That being said, I would say it's not a necessary skill, but what is important is being able to understand systems and architecture at least a high enough level to understand the engineering work that goes into something. So, you kind of think about it as like a production line in an old school factory. You don't necessarily need to know how to build the machinery and like how to do like the actual steps of work that people in an assembly line would know how to do. But the more you know, the better. But as long as you understand how those machines work together, you're able to communicate that to business stakeholders, especially when you get questions as to like why something is taking, so long, or, reasonable expectations. That's really the best skill set there, as well as being able to work with an engineering team to break up a large task into maybe specific components that could be worked on a little bit easier. And if you have an understanding of how your product under the hood is divided up, you can also start thinking about how to maybe roll out an MVP without touching everything under the hood, just the parts that you really need to work on, at least initially maybe. But again, like I would absolutely say the more you know, the better. And especially if you're going for a thing nowadays, it's not a requirement, but it's heavily looked up upon. So I would not, I wouldn't diminish that knowledge or that role.
No, I was just gonna say, I agree with that totally. You don't necessarily need a technical knowledge, but it is really helpful. I know in my job, before I came to this position here, I didn't know anything about SQL, and I just had to sort of learn it on the job, and it's been very helpful. I mean, if you want to just play around with whatever data you have, you need to be able to at least pull some kind of statements. I think one of the really helpful things is if you have teammates that are very patient with you, they will sit down with you and you have a whiteboard, you draw out what you think you know, and they'll definitely correct you, and it's very humbling. I don't know anything, but I have great teammates that are just collaborative and will explain how something works, and I can then use that and share that with some of the execs on our team in a way that they're going to understand in very tiny little baby word language, and I mean that as a compliment. But yeah, it's been it's really helpful. I know I've dived into a bunch of books this year and last year, especially O'Reilly makes a ton of really easy to understand books about system architecture, microservices, and just having those things it's helpful to have a conversation with your team, and learn more about it, and especially what Zohair was saying in terms of breaking things down. If you're going to be assigning devs some work for front end or back end, yeah, there's some minimum amounts of information you should know. What's front end, what's back end, what is part of your core components, what's part of extended architecture. All those types of things are really helpful because at least you can also debate or push back in terms of is it really going to take this amount of time, or is it really this size? Help me understand where you're coming from. And the more we can speak each other's language, the better. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you guys in terms of it's not a requirement, but it's true that it's helpful. And I guess I won't repeat everything you said, but rather touch on like how to acquire those skills. Find an ally, like find a friend of yours or like someone you meet at a meetup or a coworker or someone like is an engineer. Like just find one and grab onto them and ask them all your questions and really kind of taking notes, never like asking twice the same thing and trying to like really like progress and making that effort. You can progress a lot faster than I went to a boot camp and like honestly it's a great experience, but the technologies that we're using today are not the technologies that I learned to code in, and I've not coded since my boot camp. So like literally it's not like I'm reusing exactly what I learned, but it gave me this like builder's mentality, which I think you can achieve without necessarily going through the hassle of like learning how to code, but rather hanging out with engineers and really understanding, okay, why is this hard? Why is this easy? What it communicates with what? And like drawing is like really helpful, like you were saying, like whiteboarding and really taking an hour at a time. If you join a new team, really having this attitude of like humility and not pretending like you're an engineer, you're not, and that's perfectly fine. And usually product managers that think that they're engineers are not very good at their jobs because they tend to be micromanaging the engineers. Rather, you're coming from a place of humility and trust in your engineers, and you use them as, can you give me more information so I can make better decisions for you as well? And that usually is a kind of a system that works well, and that can be an answer to, you're giving them more insights on the user's perspective. You're like teaching that to them and you're giving them that information, and in exchange you're asking for more information of like kind of like under the hood, like how are things working and how can I make better decisions.
Okay, so how do you define success? How do you set KPIs and OKRs? Do you follow a specific framework or process?
I mean, I don't personally follow one specific framework or process. Like, I think it really depends on the company you're at, what the goal is. I think high level, it's a combination. I mean, since I've been working at growth analytics have been, a big part of it. So, the pirate metrics, like the AAARR metrics, are kind of a big part of, what kind of goes into that. I mean, I would look up pirate metrics if you're interested. It's kind of just breaks down the different pieces of growth and kind of highlights specific problems. It kind of makes you lay out where the biggest growth challenge you're facing might be. So you'll look at like your retention rates, your acquisition rates, what activation looks like for your particular product. And I think that helps guide. And then there's a number of financial frameworks that I think are really good to couple with that. Patient Pop for a long time used cost of delay, which was like a really interesting model where you kind of weigh out key like epics on your roadmap, normally the big chunks, you kind of weigh out what you're going to get out of it and kind of create a little bit of a financial projection to what you're going to get on from that specific feature, not in just one go, but on a monthly basis. And then cost of delay refers to what it's going to cost you if you don't build it. So it kind of makes you look at, say, in my case, all right, what's the core growth metric that we're perhaps lacking and need to really show the most love to? But what of those would also get us the most revenue impact? So maybe like, then you kind of weigh those out and you might see like, all right, the biggest gap to fill is with your activation rate. But actually, even though your retention is really good, you'll get more money month over month by focusing on those projects. And so I think being able to kind of lay that out has helped me. But I would also say by no means would I be stuck on any of those. I think you kind of have things that come up, be it like improving infrastructure or operational stuff, or even like legal requirements for XYZ reason that you would have to work on in a given quarter, just kind of depending on really what the cadence of the company is and what you need to work on. So it's kind of a half answer, I guess.
I think like I love Zohair's answer, and I think like there are like so many different levels of where you could be like measuring something. I think if you like, I'll just talk about something that has happened to me recently. when I came into the role that I'm in now, I actually inherited the software that was built like 3 years ago, very fast, very shoddy, a lot of copy paste everywhere. And so it had a lot of problems. In fact, one of the biggest problems, the biggest nightmares, is saving something took 45 seconds for saving and reloading like the homepage for a lot of our users. And it is unacceptable in any decade for it to take 45 seconds. So one thing that I've learned, and this is like really interesting, just collaborating with like the system architects and with our developers, like coming up with a lot of performative kind of metrics as well. How fast should something take? How long should something be down if it ever like, you know, fails out or errors out? The ticketing project I'm working on, we have to answer a lot of those questions for the business, because if you have, let's say we're doing an on sale for like a major festival like Coachella, if our systems go down for more than 15 to 20 minutes, that's a loss of a ton of revenue. So there are some metrics like that that are kind of a little more zoomed in. I just think that's something that it's been interesting to learn this past year. Just wanted to throw that out there and share that.
Yeah, I think for like OKRs or like kind of like milestone metrics, like I don't use like a specific framework. I try to use a lot of common sense and just try to have a small amount of metrics, but we're really looking at them. Often I think, especially now, it's like all like data driven, and like a lot of people are looking into analytics and like data a lot, and they're plugging a lot of products on their products to follow every user interaction. Like I think it's can become a little counterproductive if you don't know how to analyze that. Like you can spend a lot of time maintaining this set of data and not really learning anything as significant from it. So I think it's better to start with a much smaller set of metrics, like how many users do you have, how often they come back, why do they churn, like how often do they churn, and do you know like which feature like makes them churn, that kind of stuff, like very, very basic kind of user metrics, and then you add to that. So like the best practice I like to do is starting with this very small set, which is usually a lot more like business focused, meaning like where is the money coming in and coming out, or where are the users coming in and coming out when you don't have a business model that's like per user. And then if you just start building features that are supposed to answer a specific problem, and for each feature you build, you make sure that you associate it to one clear KPI that actually measures if it did or not solve that problem. And you just start incrementing like more and more metrics for your product and your company. And I think that's a better way to also round up everybody around those and make them easy to communicate. Like I used to send like for all of my products before, which now it's a little bit different, like the setup again, like with clients and stuff, it's a little bit different work. But before, like when I was like owning my own product within a bigger organization, like sending emails like org-wide or like for my team, and then anyone could like hop on the email chain if they wanted to, like I could add them with the main metrics and like or North Stars, was really productive. And it just felt like very easy also because those metrics were really easy to grab. There were not that many of them. So just like sending an email every Friday with like 5 metrics being like, we did better or worse than last week and better or worse than last month or last year at the same moment. It's really helpful, and it helps you think like longer term and like kind of higher level, and helps you keep strategic and not just being in the day-to-day like very granular details of oh, this feature is designed or is not designed yet, or that kind of stuff. I also just wanted to put that out there. If any of you guys need like help, maybe some of you are looking for jobs, like help like looking at resumes or like answering follow-up questions, like you might not have questions right now, you might have a question in 1 week, just reach out on LinkedIn. And I see Raphael saying that, so I guess like that works for him too, and Zohair as well. So yeah, do not hesitate. Like a lot of us, I think, gotta start and by asking for help and like meeting people, and then 1 people leads to 3, and 3 leads to like so many different people. So really like reach out, and that's a pleasure for us.
And also, if you're interested in talking to any other PMs, they are all in our SGVUX Slack. So in addition to email and LinkedIn and all the other ways, that's just one other way that you guys could talk with them too, if you're already in our Slack group.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.